Now, amid the daily salvo of Israeli airstrikes, Hamas rockets and the horrors of war, the conflict in the Middle East is continuing to worsen. Last Saturday's attack by Palestinian militants is continuing to have a dramatic impact not only on the lives of Israelis, but on other nationals living and working in Israel. And for those who are just visiting the country and who've suddenly found themselves caught up in the war, it's triggered fear and uncertainty. Among them is Shoshana Dominic-Charles, a British-Nigerian Jew who lives in the US, but who's been stuck in Israel for days after all flights out of the country were cancelled. And Shoshana Dominic-Charles joins me now on the line from Jerusalem. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I should say that there was a bit of an alarm earlier when I think you had to dash into a shelter. But that alarm was later dissipated, and here you are. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just tell us where you were and what you were doing when Hamas launched that deadly attack on Israel last Saturday.
Well, hi, Charles. Yes, I was actually in a small town in Israel called Beitar, which is about 19 miles away from Jerusalem. And it was, first of all, it was the Shabbat, it was the Jewish Sabbath, and it was also a holiday called Simchat Torah. And so it was a pretty big day for all observant Jews. And I was actually in the synagogue when the alarm went off, the siren went off. And it was very disconcerting, very scary, because I actually grew up in Nigeria during the Civil War. And we used to experience a lot of bombardments, in fact, daily bombardments at the time. And the air raid alarm sounds very, very similar to, the bomb sirens that one hears in Israel. So for a moment, I was having a flashback. I was, my 9-year-old self wondering what was going on and what I was supposed to do. It took me about 5 minutes or so to recompose myself and remember that I was no longer 9 years old and that I had total trust in my creator to take care of everything. So I calmed down. And the sirens kept on going throughout the day. I mean, they must have gone off about, 7 or 8 times throughout the day, every time a rocket or a missile was, thrown at that town.
I mean, that's an absolutely extraordinary story, because, we're sitting here and you're living it there. And when those sirens sound, what do you do after you hear it?
Well, you're supposed to go to what they call a safe room, which is basically a bomb shelter. And I would say that 90% of the buildings in Israel, simply because of the history here, they come equipped with bomb shelters. And but it takes a moment to get from where you are to the bomb shelter. And I actually didn't know where the bomb shelter was, because it was the first time in that synagogue when that happened. And so, I saw various men running off in various directions. And, after about 5 or so minutes, I went downstairs and I asked somebody who was actually setting the table for, the feast that we were going to have later on that afternoon, what I should do. And he didn't think I had to do anything. He said, you can stay here, you can go in the bomb shelter, you can go back upstairs. And so I elected to go back upstairs and just, sat there and continued my prayers.
That's extraordinary. And of course, you are not Israeli, though you are Jewish, and you are simply visiting the country. What sort of impact has this conflict had on you as it continues?
Well, it's devastating. It's heartbreaking because, I think everybody in Israel now knows at least one person who was either killed or hurt in the south of Israel when this happened on Saturday. So it's absolutely heartbreaking. Of course, there's plenty of uncertainty. It's really, really sad. And at the same time, I just, as a Jew, we are one people. And I stand with all my brothers. And, this is a test. It's really enabled us to come together as a people in the determination that we're not going to be victims anymore. This is the end. This is not going to continue. It's very, very clear to us that what happened on Saturday had really nothing to do with politics or with, land or anything like that. It was just pure Jew hatred. It was pure savagery. And we are not going to live like that anymore. And I think every Jew in Israel is of that mind that enough is enough. We are not going to live like this anymore.
Well, I mean, that's perfectly understandable, and that the emotions obviously still very raw, given that this has just happened. But I wonder if you feel any sympathy at all for what the people of Gaza, old people, women and children, are going through, and what life is like for them under Israeli airstrikes, with whole streets reduced to rubble.
I think that war is really horrible. This is my second war. I lived through a war. It's absolutely awful. And but there's really nothing else that we can do. We do have to root out the terror. The people of Gaza really elected Hamas. They chose that government. That was a choice. And they have been, given fair warning. They were celebrating in the streets of Gaza at, the pictures of young babies being decapitated and, people being murdered. It seems like this is something that's acceptable to them. I don't understand it. I would not want to live like that. But, I just, there's nothing really I can say about it, except that, the Jews cannot continue to be cannon fodder. We cannot continue to be victimized by everybody. It's like enough is enough,
Well,
so yes, that's.
Well, that emotion is obviously understandable, but I wonder for you personally. You mentioned that you are connected, obviously, because you're Jewish, but you're not Israeli. So I wonder if there's an element of detachment, because you're really more British and American and probably Nigerian than Israeli.
Right, I'm not British at all, actually. I lived in London. I lived in England for a long time. I'm American and I'm Nigerian. I'm not Israeli, but like I said, it really doesn't. I don't find this to have anything at all to do with politics. It doesn't really have to do with the geographical entity that we call Israel. It has everything to do with Jew hatred, and the Hamas terrorists have expressed that as much. And it's a really interesting thing to see that, in the countries where this horror, this savagery is being celebrated, they're no longer pretending that it has to do with Israel or so-called Palestine. You have people chanting things like gas the Jews and kill the Jews. So I don't think it has anything to do with being Israeli. It has everything to do with the Jews. This is something that has been going on now for thousands of years. No nation has ever succeeded in eliminating the Jews. I don't know why they keep trying. Nobody seems to have got the memo that this is not something that's going to work. We have a mission in this world. We have a duty to be the light unto the nations and to bring Torah and light and love and peace to the entire world. For some reason, which is completely beyond my comprehension, this triggers the most intense hatred in other nations. And I don't really understand it. I don't understand the baseless hatred of Jews, but I do know that part of what we have to do in this world, and I'm talking now about humanity, is root out evil. And what we saw on Saturday is pure evil. Let's not make any mistakes about that.
Right. I think people would agree with you, but they would also say that it is clear that the Palestinians, not so much Hamas, but the Palestinian people, are reacting simply to the controls that have been imposed on them over a long period of time, and just the same way that the Israelis are reacting now, and the fact remains that you can't argue that the way that Gaza and the West Bank and so on have been controlled over a long period of time is bringing light and love to the world. But that's a different story.
No, that's because Gaza and the West Bank are being controlled by Hamas. It's not being controlled. We bring education, we bring hospitals. I know many, many Jews who are working in hospitals, who are working in schools. We bring all of that. Hamas uses all the money they collect from a myriad countries for the development of the Palestinian Authority area. They use that to buy weapons and to kill Jews. The oppression and the honor killing and all the kinds of nonsense and atrocities that go on in Gaza and the West Bank have nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with Jews. This is the life that they've chosen. The control of the West Bank, the control of Gaza is by Hamas. We don't control Gaza.
Well, at the risk of turning this into a sort of back and forth, verbal patball, the Israel has blockaded Gaza for quite a long time now. But let's move away from that. And what I'd like to ask you is, how are you preparing for the next few days till the departure of your rescheduled flight out of Israel?
Well, I personally take it one moment at a time. I'm here actually with a friend of mine, and it's really one moment at a time because we don't know what's going to happen in the next moment. And, 2 flights have been cancelled so far. As I understand it, El Al is still continuing to fly planes in and out of Israel. And so I have a flight booked with El Al, and, God willing, that flight will go through. But if it doesn't, we'll just take the next step. I don't know what that step is at the moment. Thankfully, our Airbnb host is an absolute angel. And he has actually canceled all his future reservations and said, you stay for as long as you need to. So that's where we find ourselves right now. Everybody comes together to help everybody else, because this is a tragedy that has befallen all of us as the Jewish nation. I would actually go as far as saying that this is a tragedy that has befallen the world. But for some reason, the nations of the world are willing to stand by and have Jews be slaughtered. And we're just not willing to do that anymore. So, it's all in God's hands. I take one day at a time, one moment at a time, put one foot in front of the other, and follow the instructions that the authorities give, and we'll see what happens.
And just very briefly, we've got less than a minute or so left. Fascinating talking with you, I have to say. But some countries, including Canada and Australia, have announced that they'll run special flights to evacuate their citizens. Given an option, would you be prepared to leave Israel like that, or is that a tough choice for you?
Well, no, it's not a tough choice for me. I was scheduled to leave Israel on the 9th of October, on Monday, before all the stuff started to happen. The United States State Department put out a form that all the Americans who are wanting to leave Israel should fill. We've filled that form. They're taking it step by step. They say that, they may be able to arrange evacuation to another country, and then it will be up to us to get from that country to the United States. I'm not going to cancel the flight I've booked, but if something happens and I can, leave tomorrow or the day after, I don't think that's going to happen. But if that were to happen, I'd be perfectly happy to leave and, give up my seat for somebody who might need it more on El Al. So no, I don't feel compelled to be in Israel, but having found myself in Israel, I'll do what I can to be of support to the young men and women who are literally laying down their lives at the borders. I mean, most of these soldiers are 18, 19, 20, young people. I'll do whatever I can to support them and to support anybody locally that needs help. So that's how it is for me right now.
Well, we want to thank you very much indeed. I mean, it's been really illuminating talking with you. And also, we would ask you to stay safe because, safety is paramount. Shoshana Dominic-Charles is a American Nigerian who's lived in Britain for a long time, who's Jewish and who is in Israel at the moment, stuck there for days after her flight was cancelled out of the country, and she was talking to me there on the line from Jerusalem. Thank you very much indeed.